This is the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. This is Season 4, Episode 6. Today I am very pleased as punch to be able to give you my interview with JP McMahon, who's written the Irish Cookbook produced by Phaidon Press this year. It's a phenomenal cookbook, and I hasten to call it just a cookbook because although, after talking to so many authors, looking at so many cookbooks over the last few years, I feel like the face and the shape and the soul of the cookbook has changed largely, and it's become something other. The Irish Cookbook is a phenomenal piece of work. Not only is it just an incredible cookbook of Irish cuisine, but it also touches on history, the indigenous food of Ireland, and the culture, and so much more. So I really can't recommend this book enough. It's just a beautiful, beautiful book, and I think you should go out and purchase it immediately. You're going to love it, not only for the great recipes, but the beautiful photography and design, and just the text. JP McMahon has written quite a bit of text for the cookbook, and he talks a lot about the subject of Irish food. So if you're at all interested in this, and you should be, you definitely want to take a look at this. The vegetable production in the cookbook is fantastic. Incorporating the use of indigenous berries, plants, vegetables, things like seaweed make a big addition to the cookbook, and that's something that's becoming very exciting in food around the world right now. In addition, the baking parts of it that I've always liked about Irish food is in there as well, and it's very prominent. So definitely check that out. He's also, writes quite a bit online. He writes for the Irish Times every Sunday. So you want to, basically check him out. He has 4 restaurants we're going to be talking about in Ireland. So I really want to hasten to get to the interview part because you're going to enjoy my conversation with JP McMahon. And here we go. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones, the Well-Seasoned Librarian, and today I'm blessed to have on our podcast JP McMahon. He's a writer of the wonderful The Irish Cookbook by Phaidon, and it's a new cookbook this year, and it's beautiful. It's glorious. I recommend you to get it as soon as possible. JP, thank you for being on the show. Now, for our guests who are not familiar with your work, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
I can. I'm a bit of a mixed bag now, so I will say that at the outset. I mean, I'm a chef and restaurateur. I've been a chef since I was 15, restaurateur since 2008. As you said in your introduction, I'm a writer as well, both a food writer and a bit of an academic as well. And I suppose we have 3 restaurants in Galway, in the west of Ireland, very close to each other. 2 are right across the road from each other, and another is about 500 meters away. And I suppose over the last 10 years or so, we've tried to make Galway and Ireland a more recognizable place for food, both nationally and internationally.
Well, and also, when I was looking up and doing research on you for the questions, I saw that you're quite a prolific writer as well. You have quite a lot of output, and you have a regular article that I could see that I've seen online. I just wanted to ask you, how did this all actually come about for you? You've had quite a few years, haven't you?
Yeah, I forgot that I write weekly for the Irish Times. Sometimes I forget myself when it's due in, but I do, a weekly column for the national newspaper. And like as I said, I mean, the last 2 years have been difficult. I mean, for everyone in hospitality and probably for everyone in general. I mean, our flagship restaurant, Aniar, which has a 1 Michelin star. I mean, we closed that for 18 months during the pandemic because, well, most of our guests are American or were American, and we just couldn't foresee opening the restaurant in the middle of the pandemic when there was no travel. So, like, it has changed slightly after the pandemic. We have a bit more Irish people in, but we're still very dependent in Ireland and in Galway on North American tourists. So it was difficult kind of in the restaurant industry because Galway only has 80,000 people, and 1 million people might go through Galway in any given season in terms of tourists. So there was a big gap I suppose to fill.
Now, how did you begin your life as a chef? Where was the crossroads moment for you when you decided to pursue being a chef and a restaurant owner?
I suppose I never felt I decided. I suppose things gradually happened. I mean, I loved cooking in school. I did home economics in secondary school. My first job as a 15-year-old was in a kitchen, and I liked cooking, and I kind of went back and forth between cooking and I went to college as a mature student in Cork in 2002 to do English and art history, and at that point I would have been in my early 20s. I really thought I wasn't going to cook again, and I began cooking 3 or 4 years later, and kind of went between studying a little bit, kept cooking, and it wasn't really, I suppose, until we opened our Cava Bodega in 2008 that I really committed to, this is my life as a chef and as a restaurateur. Because I suppose being a chef is intense enough, but I suppose opening a restaurant, it becomes very much 24/7, and that was when I had to, I suppose, commit to that. But I suppose I've always liked to combine food and writing, and food and, I suppose, and its representation through their various different mediums, whether it's video or photography or even podcasts like we're doing now. We have a podcast for our symposium called Food on the Edge, and that, I mean, I suppose I love engaging with the stories that food brings up, and I suppose that come around when people travel for food or people engage with food.
Now, you studied English and art history at the University of College Cork. What inspired you to follow this educational path?
Like, I've always loved writing. I mean, for my love of writing and literature probably predates my love of cooking, in terms of whether it's poetry or plays or books. And I suppose I always saw writing as a pastime while I was a chef, because I suppose that there's only so many jobs you can do as a writer. So I went back to college as a mature student to, I suppose, follow that love. And I've always loved art in terms of painting and photography, and I wanted to study it. And I suppose it has informed, particularly it has helped me write better, and the various books that I've written, and the articles. I mean, I see it much more holistically now. I mean, I'm 43 now. I mean, when I was studying art history in English, I thought it was so removed from cooking, and I was like, I really struggled to bring them together. I was like cooking on the weekends, college during the week, and I was like, and then if you talk to the English and art history people about cooking, about professional chefing, they probably wouldn't have much to say. And likewise, if you go in and talk to the professional chefs and talk to them about going to some exhibition, that like, we're too busy to talk about this. But I feel whether I have just matured or whether society has matured, now I feel the two of them are much more in harmony. And I suppose even when we did the Phaidon book last year, 2020, the photography, the text, the way it looks, like all of that came into play, and I actually felt like, oh, this is really fitting together. And I mean, Phaidon were my first choice to approach, because Phaidon published beautiful art history books, and I've used them for many years, and I love the way they design books. That was one of my key things, and the way they make a book as opposed to just reading it. And so I still love English and art history, and I just submitted a PhD in drama in my spare time, and as you do. But I did that over the last 4 years, and COVID helped, because if COVID helped, that helped me finish my PhD. So I mean, I would always say I wouldn't say I'm confused, but like, I'm certainly a chef that sits slightly outside the normal box of being a chef, in terms of, I wouldn't like to call myself academic or intellectual, but I just like to see food as more than just sitting down to eat.
Well, going on that tact, I'd like to talk about the cookbook, because I almost I hesitate to call it just a cookbook, because it's a very important book and there's a lot of writing in it that's very palpable, that's very real. And it's I would just, I don't want to dismiss, I mean, cookbooks, I love cookbooks, and I would never use cookbooks as, like, as a lesser term, but like it's a big book. It's more than a cookbook, though. It really talks about history and culture, and also the food of Ireland, and the food that's like indigenous to Ireland. And it talks about history. I mean, and it's also just a gorgeous, gorgeous book in and of itself. How did you come to conceptualize and write the book? Where did this come from?
I suppose it began. I mean, it began when we opened Aniar 10 years ago, and decided to look into indigenous foodstuffs in Ireland. So whether it was wild seaweed or herbs or different wild birds, wild fish, like all of the salmon, which everyone knows, but wild salmon, a lot of things that I suppose for me people took for granted, because when you think of Irish food, generally you think about stews or things that are hearty, and we I suppose over the years in Aniar have investigated what Irish food was, and also what it can be, very much inspired by the Nordic food revolution that took place in the Nordic countries from about 2005, about trying to produce a cuisine from your native ingredients, or from, like, well, 80 to 90% native ingredients. There's always things that you need from the outside world, like sugar or lemons, or these things that your country just doesn't produce. But we began this process, and over time we refined it, and then we, I suppose, the just before the I suppose we before I started writing the book, we started putting this symposium on called Food on the Edge, which I briefly mentioned. And really, in a nutshell, it brings about 50 chefs or industry professionals over to Ireland to showcase Ireland, Irish food, culture. So many different chefs and industry professionals, some very, very famous, some lesser known. And I suppose I got talking to Fidon, I think at the second or third year, so about 2017, and there wasn't any Bible, so to speak, in Irish on Irish food. I mean, Fidon published these books on different countries, so they have an Italian one, a Spanish one, they have one on Japan and one on China. And initially, excuse me, they said, God, like, there couldn't be that many recipes in Ireland. I mean, there must be like a handful. And the book has 480 recipes in it, and actually there was another 400 that didn't fit in the book because I wrote too much. And they said, do you want all the words or do you want more recipes? And I said, no, I want to keep the words. And that's, as you said, like, there's a lot of text in there, because I suppose I felt it necessary to try and inform the reader or the cook that, like, each section in the book, and there's a lot of history to different ingredients in Ireland. So whether it's wild duck, or whether it's eggs, or whether it's dairy, or simple things like desserts. And I try to fold that history into the process, not in an academic way, but in a way that maybe when you make the dessert, you feel, God, yeah, I am engaging in a tradition. Something as simple as, say, bread and butter pudding, which, I mean, unfortunately, most of the Irish dishes that people take for granted, and they're just kind of like, oh yeah, that's just a dish. But we have to remember that every time people cook at home, and they cook over time and over the years and then over the decades, I mean, these things become historical, and that's what fascinated me. I mean, the oldest recipe book in Ireland is only from 1688. So everything before 1688 is mentions of foodstuff, but that we don't have any recipes predating. So that's only 400 years ago, and people have been in Ireland for 10,000 years. So we really don't know an awful lot, other than, say, through archaeological digs, where they find, okay, people ate beef here, people ate oysters there. I mean, how do they cook it? How do they eat it? A lot of it is guesswork. And I suppose I find that fascinating, that I mean, for the vast majority of the history of Ireland, we actually have no written record. About 90% of the time, we have no written record of what or how people combine things. And I suppose that's the artistic license that I suppose take in the book. So I say, look, well, we have oysters and seaweed, and they've both been here 10,000 years, and like maybe that there's no reason to say that people did not eat oysters and seaweed together, and that. And so that's, I suppose, the modus operandi of the book. And it took 4 years to write, from about 2017 to 2020. 2016 was the very first recipes that we started to write. And there's enough there for a whole sequel. I've written a fish book in lockdown just on recipes that were left over, and it's about trying to, again, I suppose, start the whole process again. But look, at the moment, the book is selling well. I think it's sold about 25,000 copies worldwide, and I mean, that's credit to Phaidon as well. Their distribution system is very, very good. So I mean, I will wait a year or two and then see, will we enlarge the project, and really any section of the book. And if there's any of your listeners who want to write a book on Irish food, like any section in that book could be amplified to a book. Like we edited down so much, and you could write a book on milk in Ireland, and there's so much there.
It's such a beautiful book, and I loved all the recipes in it. I loved reading them and getting a sense of what Irish cooking is like. And I've read other books before. I have lots of other books, but this was, I think, the best I've ever seen. And did you feel that somebody needed to kind of address the idea? Because many people in the West don't know. We don't know over here in America usually what Irish people cook or eat. And I think that usually if we get a book on it, it's usually kind of twee and maybe like meant to be a gift or something. And it's got, a handful of recipes, like you said. So did you want to kind of address that and like talk to the world and say, this is our food, this is our heritage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I completely agree with you in the sense that I suppose the way that we have marketed Irish food probably since our independence, maybe since the 1920s, and we have kind of treated it as a lesser thing, and used it as a vehicle to get people to Ireland to do something else, to look at the scenery, to engage in the history of their family and that. And other than, say, a few books, like we could say Doreen Allen or Myrtle Allen, who are very, I suppose, famous food writers in and of themselves, or maybe Theodora Fitzgibbons. There's been a few, by 4 or 5 writers in the 20th century that have tried to do what I did, and I use their books, and also I make reference to their books a lot. But I suppose the problem was that a lot of times these books were published internally in Ireland, and they weren't considered as much for the export market, and they never made it to the States. I mean, 1 or 2, Doreen has probably made it, or I know Coleman Andrews did a Food of Ireland book as well. But I think by and large, like a book addressing Ireland as an entity, I think was missing. And I suppose I felt that I wanted to try and address this, particularly for an international audience, and particularly for a North American audience.
Now, as I've said before, it's a beautiful book. Like it is visually arresting. Now, there was some production work that was done by, the design was done by Julia Hastings. And I know that Phaidon usually does really beautiful books. How much of a hand did you have in the look of the book as somebody who studied art?
Well, I suppose, I mean, Judith did most of the stuff for the book, and I suppose was there to say I like it, and I like the way it works in the book, and the font, but everything was supposed important to us. As I said, the way in which the recipes were written, the font, the amount. I would have loved to get more photographs in, but unfortunately, as they kept saying to me, the more photographs, the less text. So and I kept saying, no, we have to keep this text in. And also the end of the book with the index of wild food is quite long. And I had wanted originally to have that illustrated. So I would have loved to have an illustration of the seaweeds and the mushrooms and the wild herbs. But unfortunately, we just ran out of space. And like if you look through the wild food index, you'll find that there's loads of recipes embedded in that. And so there's 480 in the book, but sometimes when there was a small recipe for, say, I don't know, rose hip, they said, well, how about just put that into the rose hip index and say, this is what you can do with it. So, it was, I suppose, an effort to try and cram as much in as possible, because I suppose I was afraid that, well, what if I don't get another chance to do this, and we need to address this. So, but look, I mean, in spite of COVID, I mean, the book literally came out at the beginning of COVID, like March 2020, and in spite of that, it still has we sold an awful lot during lockdown. Whatever they're available, they sell well, and like it is great to, I suppose, to talk to people saying, as you said, they never realized that Irish food had such depth to it and had such history. And I suppose the book is an encouragement for any country to write about their food culture, because I suppose we have viewed food through the lens of the empires, whether that's France or Italy or Spain or England, and I suppose lesser countries or the colonies have said, well, we don't have a food culture, we borrowed everything. But I think wherever there are people, there is a food culture. And even if we say, well, Irish, English, Scottish, and Welsh food culture are similar, they could all still write independent books and have many, many different variations. I mean, you could European cooking is there's a lot of similarities in it, but there are still dishes that you will find, like in the book, that might have been made in Kerry in the southwest of Ireland, that would not have been made anywhere else. And I suppose that's the beauty of the regionality of food, and how every time you make a recipe, over time it changes. And when you pass a recipe down to, or you give it to a friend, like they might change it, and then they might pass it on again and change it again. And then that's the beauty of the personality of cooking.
I'm so glad you included so many photographs, because to me, it was really important seeing them. I've read some recipes that are in your cookbook and other cookbooks, and usually there's no photos almost ever in an Irish cookbook when I've seen them. And it's like, I really would like to have been able to see what the item looks like. But some of the way you tackle game meat and vegetables, it's so exciting. And just the simple recipe of asparagus wrapped in sea lettuce, it kind of excites you and makes you go, I want to try that. That looks amazing. And there's so many really wonderful recipes in here, and getting a chance to visually see them, I think, is really helpful to somebody who might want to tackle it themselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting you picked that recipe, because we had a little bit of I wouldn't say we had a fight. We had a disagreement because I had too much seaweed in the book, and Friday were saying, look, this is a very specific ingredient to Ireland, and what if you can't get it in North America? And I was like, oh, you can buy it in Whole Foods or whatever. And like they said, people are not going to be down on the beach picking seaweeds. But for me, like if you take an overview of the book, there are recipes that are traditional, and that's like your brown bread and your lamb stews, and then there are recipes that are possibly historic, and so some game recipes like venison that actually we can date back to a specific time. There are some that are imaginative, like say when we look back 8,000 years ago and said, okay, people ate wild sea bass, and then I have to just guess, well, okay, how did they eat it? And then there's ones that have been influenced by Aniar, by, I suppose, our own cooking, and that asparagus wrapped in sea lettuce is very much, I suppose, for me, it speaks very much of contemporary Irish food, that it's very light, it's very of the west of Ireland. Asparagus season is so short in Ireland, but the sea lettuce is really nice, and it's just a nice little thing to do, and it's a lovely, I suppose it's a lovely talking point, and getting that image in. There was a funny story about that image, because it wasn't one of the recipes that got picked. So we had 900 recipes, and there was 300 went out the window, and when we had 600, and then we had to get them down to 450. And then I said, you know what? If we photograph the asparagus with sea lettuce, we can just pretend that it was picked, and we'll just say, oh, I didn't know it wasn't picked, but we'll make the photo so nice that we'll make sure that they pick it. And they went, God, I love that photo. And they said, let's put it in the book. And so there was always this kind of push and pull about me putting in too much seaweed, and finally I'm going, of course they know how to sell books, and they were like, listen, we have to. And so it's a good marriage, and that is, look, that's what an editor is for. An editor is to, I suppose, to rein in your creative spirit, because sometimes creative artists never stop creating. And she's like, you have to stop. We have enough recipes. Stop looking for more recipes. Let's get down to the editing. And of course, for me, that's not the most interesting. It's kind of, no, I want to keep cooking. I want to make more recipes. And they were like, no, we have enough. No, you're not sending any more in. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed my time with them.
Yeah, you had a great episode on Food on the Edge that talked about seaweed, and it coincided, I think, with so many cooks in America taking up the challenge of cooking with seaweed. And I think that in the Bay Area here, where I'm at, I live near the ocean, so there's a lot of recent people that are starting to sell seaweed at farmers markets. It's being sold everywhere here, and people are wanting to eat it and cook with it. And it's becoming something that's considered a culinary must for like good health here.
Yeah, and actually, just literally about half an hour before we were talking, I saw Alice Waters posting about seaweed producers in the Bay Area who are out foraging huge bits of kelp. And I mean, the Pacific is warmer than the west of Ireland, and so the seaweed is going to grow more. And that's, I suppose, for me, the downside of being in the cold sometimes is that, okay, we do get some beautiful small seaweed, but we don't get that lovely long kombu and kelp that the Japanese use. And I remember cooking in Toronto 2 or 3 years ago, and you get the seaweed folded like a blanket, and it's like wrapped really nicely. And I remember sending it a picture to our seaweed producer, seaweed harvester, because he usually just picks it and I get it dried in black bags. And I was like, would you like to? You should wrap your seaweed and sell it in little packages. And he was like, would you ever leave me alone? So the Japanese treat seaweed like gold, and we treat it like, I don't know, like you just throw it onto the back of a tractor and then drop it into someone. And I was like, God, like, I mean, we're learning, you know, and I think that we can learn about how to treat seaweed better and to give it more value. Because I suppose for most people still, seaweed is just something that gets washed ashore, and it's annoying and it smells. And it's really unfortunate, because not only, as you said, for health, for nutrition, but for flavor and taste, it has so many possibilities. And from wrapping stuff, wrapping fish, wrapping asparagus, chopping it up and putting it into stews, like there's so much you can do with it.
Now, I did touch on just now Food on the Edge podcast, which is a magnificent podcast. Can you talk about how you began to start the Food on the Edge podcast?
Yeah, I suppose we started it with I think we started before lockdown, or actually we might have started it after I suppose once the pandemic had began. We might have done a few episodes before that, but I suppose it was another way of communicating and another way of telling the story, not only of Irish food, but then some of the last ones we've interviewed different chefs from around the world and tried to, I suppose, put more personality and voice into cooking. And I suppose I've really enjoyed it. And I think podcasts are a wonderful vehicle at the moment to communicate to people, because you put them out into cyberspace, and all of a sudden someone contacts you from halfway across the world and says, oh, I heard your podcast. And I really like that. And even though it's not about, for us, it's not about listenership or in terms of like figures and that, we produce them a couple of hundred people listen to them. But for me, it's just another way to talk about food and to try and encourage people to see food as something that's experiential, as opposed to just you eat it when you're hungry. You know, it's a cultural thing, it's a historical thing, and if we don't, I suppose, nurture it, we won't always have it. And I think that's something that's important.
Now, you are the culinary director of the EatGalwayRestaurant Group. Can you tell us about the Eat Galway Group?
Yeah, no, we started, again, I suppose a bit like my chefing career. We did it, I suppose Eat Galway grew organically, and we started Cava in 2008, and that was our, I suppose, a tapas restaurant. We wanted to, I suppose, bring a taste of Spain to Ireland, but also a taste of or the way that the Spanish ate, and that was by sharing food, and I suppose eating a bit later. And I suppose anyone who's been to Ireland, if you're eating late in Ireland, you generally have very few options. Most of the time it's a chip shop or a kebab. And we always wondered when we were in Spain, going, why don't we have a culture of eating late at night where people sit down, have a glass of wine and have some charcuterie and cheese or some olives and that. And so they were some of the ideas that we wanted to explore. So that was 2008. And then in 2011, the restaurant next door to Cava closed. And so I suppose we just said, we'll be doing other restaurants. I don't ask me why we decided this, but we did. And that was very much at the height of the influence of the Nordic food movement in terms of looking at indigenous foods. And we said, well, why don't we do a restaurant based on this? It was a very small restaurant. We opened it kind of like as a bistro, with a very small menu. And the following year, the restaurant won a Michelin star, and that kind of like was an avalanche hitting the restaurant. And it very much, we had to change an awful lot of things because I suppose it brought international spotlight to the restaurant and to our other restaurants. And I suppose over those years, and with Tartare now as well, I suppose we branded the restaurant Eat Galway, because I suppose we wanted to see them as, well, I suppose when people come to Galway, they need to eat, and we would like to facilitate food at every level. So I was never just interested in opening a fine dining restaurant or opening a tapas restaurant that only served this. And for me, I love food, and I love the different ways that the different things that you can do with food, and whether that's a cup of coffee and a croissant in the morning, and of course I put some seaweed in the croissants, or some lunch, some nice soup and sandwiches, then some tapas, or then a tasting menu. Like all of these things are what makes a food culture. And I suppose that's for me what Eat Galway is about.
So I wanted to ask you also, I've been looking at pictures of your Food on the Edge symposium online, and it looks really exciting. Can we talk a little bit about the Food on the Edge symposium that you're having yearly?
Yeah, it's, I suppose, and ironically, I mean, the genesis of Food on the Edge came out of a little bit of time I spent in North America. One was in Charleston, when I cooked in Charleston with about 14 or 20 international chefs. We spent a week in Charleston with Sean Brock. We got this tour of Charleston, like the different foodways, the history of food there. And it got me thinking, saying, why don't we do this in Ireland? I mean, we have great ingredients, but why don't we bring chefs to Ireland? And another event I was at was called Terroir up in Toronto, which is a symposium that kind of gave people 15, 20 minutes to talk about what they do. And I combined those two things and said, well, why don't we put on an event where we invite 50 or so chefs or industry professionals or a farmer or a winemaker, and allow them to tell their story, and then also bring the visiting chefs, if you do a little culinary tour and show them our ingredients, bring them out to some of the farms, out to say a chicken farmer, out to a duck farmer, have a meal at the farm. And what I realized was, not only do I suppose we lack confidence in selling ourselves in Ireland and talking ourselves up in terms of our food, we also underappreciate, I suppose, the natural beauty of being small. And that's something I think we just take for granted. And a lot of times we see it as a negative thing. We see it like being a small country, small roads, small everything. And I remember there was a chef over from Boston, and he said to me, "God, you just don't get roads like this in America." And this was a small country road that no one would take any notice of. And it was the first time I looked at it and said, that's actually a very beautiful thing, as opposed to giving out about it, saying we need to knock this small road down and build a bigger road. And that's what we've tried to do over the last, it's since 2015. So over the last 6 years. And this year we moved it to Dublin and put it on in an urban farm in Dundrum called Airfield, which is a great example of urban farming. Really, really, a lot of Irish people don't even know about it, but it's very much up there with anything that Dan Barber or Alice Waters are doing. And again, it's, I suppose, just because we don't sing about it enough, and we don't say, look, we're world leaders in this, and so it's really about shining a light on Ireland for the benefit of ourselves and also for the visiting speakers and delegates.
I wanted to ask you about your restaurant Cava Bodega. You opened it in 2008, and it was your first restaurant. What was the experience like opening Cava in Galway, and what has been your experience with the restaurant?
Yeah, I suppose Cava is a powerhouse now. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought I lost you for a sec. Yeah, like Cava is a powerhouse now. It's like a monster. It's like those couple of hundred people a day sometimes. But ironically, when we opened it first in 2008, nobody got the idea of tapas. No one got the note. Like, they were like, "What do you mean we have to share? Like, why is stuff smaller?" No, I don't like this. Because Irish people are like, "I want my food in front of me and it's mine and I'm not sharing it. And I don't want to, why is this one coming first? Because I don't want it first." And like, it literally took 2 years. And I remember, like, if you say, for example, like Cava might do 400 people on Saturday, I remember days where we would do 8 people all day. And really, I would question going, are we doing the right thing here? I don't know. I mean, maybe we should go back to doing a la carte and main courses. But we got a review in the Irish Times in 2010, and by a restaurant critic called Tom Dorley, and he said, "Look, this is a great place to go to." And ever since then, we never looked back, and it's been a wonderful journey exploring Spanish food in Ireland, and we published a book, Cava: A Taste of Spain in Ireland, which we're publishing the fourth edition now. It's a book we published ourselves in house with my sister, who's a graphic designer, and I suppose I still see Cava as the beginning of so much, not only in terms of the renaissance of a food culture in Galway, and there were certainly other restaurants that played a part. We were just one restaurant among many, but for me, Cava led to so many more things. I mean, without Cava, we would not have opened Aniar. Without Cava, we published our book, I would have not got my column on the Irish Times. Without my column in the Irish Times, we wouldn't have got more international attention. Without Aniar, we wouldn't have got Food on the Edge, and then without Food on the Edge, we wouldn't have got a Fight On book. So all of for me, in spite of like the focus being now on Irish food culture in Ireland, all of this began with a kind of small Spanish restaurant that we opened to bring a little sunshine to Galway. And Galway can get a lot of rain, and it certainly doesn't get a lot of heat. So for me, it was about kind of transforming Galway. And we've had so many Spanish people work through the restaurant now, and we've developed so many interesting historical connections with Spain over time, and the different connections that I never even realized over the last 500 or 600 years that Ireland had with Spain, that I suppose people had forgotten, or people just hadn't paid any attention to. So lots of things we realized after the fact. But I think also one other important point to make is that Cava was the first place where we started working with local farmers. The farmers just came to us and said, Do you want to buy my chicken? I have a farm 10 or 15 kilometers away. Do you want to buy my beef? I'm here. And then once you start working with a few farmers, then more farmers come, and then the sheep yogurt farmer comes along, and then you say, well, my friend has a restaurant down the road. They might take some as well, or my other friend has a restaurant down here, and that's how it all just snowballed. And now, I mean, Galway might have 40 restaurants, and so many of them are using local produce. And I think you probably went through the exact same thing in the Bay Area in the like 90s or noughties, where this explosion of local food, and I think that's what Ireland, I mean, developed on top of that, and hopefully Galway, people will come to Galway, and we will influence other food cultures to look at us and say, wow, it's a small town, but we can do it as well.
I wanted to also ask you about your restaurant Aniar, and how it's inspired. It's in the Galway's West End, and the food is inspired by the west of Ireland. Can you tell me about your menu and the food you create for Aniar?
Yeah, so we have a tasting menu in Aniar. Now we didn't always, and I suppose now we have an 18-course tasting menu of little small plates. But when we opened first, it was very much a traditional a la carte menu with 5 starters, 5 main courses, and 5 desserts. And over time, we refined it, and I suppose tried to focus on what we were essentially doing, and that was to showcase ingredients. And so the menu is very ingredient led. Like even for say example, even tonight now we got some tuna. So that's going on as a tuna tartare. Blackberries are in season, so we've dressed the blackberries with some smoked blackberry vinegar that's produced by a local vinegar maker, and then we're going to finish it with a little some sea herbs and a little local caviar. And so all of the main ingredients, like 95% of them, are from Ireland. And that's what with each dish, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, well, how do we encapsulate the west of Ireland in 18 small dishes that start off as little canapes and go into shellfish and then vegetables and meat, and then back out through the sweet side into the petit fours. And like I still see the restaurant as being in development. We're open 10 years, but I find where we are now, I find we're in a much stronger place after the pandemic. Maybe because we closed for 18 months, and we had time to reflect on what exactly are we doing. I mean, it's a very small restaurant. There's only 20 seats in the restaurant, and we really try and focus on customer experience. We have a gorgeous wine list of our organic and natural wines, and so the focus is very much on the experience of the guest in terms of the food, but also the narrative of that the food has. We have little poems interspaced in the food, like a poem on bread and a poem on oysters, like from Seamus Heaney. And I like to fold the literary and the theatrical into it in very subtle ways.
That's wonderful. I'm very curious to find out about some people you've read, and some of the authors that you enjoy. You also have a restaurant, Tartare Café and Wine Bar.
Yeah, this is someone once described it very well. They said it was like if Cava and Aniar had a baby, it would be like Tartare. And because what it is that it's the ethos of Aniar in the shape of tasting plates. And so, I mean, initially when we opened Tartare, I wanted to do oysters and beef tartare, and they were kind of like, because they're two things that we do well in Ireland, and they are very underrepresented. So my wife was saying, a restaurant that sells beef tartare and oysters is never going to survive. You're not in New York. You're in the west of Ireland, and you better think of a longer menu with something more accessible than just beef tartare and oysters. And I was like, no, we'll just have a wine bar. And she's like, it's not Berlin either. It's like, so what we decided on was that we will do a cafe during the day with really nice sourdough sandwiches, soups, some sweet pastries, some salads, and then in the nighttime we will do our small plates. And so we have a lot of different small plates, but two of our signature ones are still our oysters with sea lettuce and caviar, and our beef tartare with smoked egg and some watercress. And they still, so we've many other dishes that small plates, but it's a little bit less formal than Aniar. Of course, the price point is a lot less, and some people have actually fallen in love with tartare now and said, like, don't tell the chefs in Aniar, but I prefer here now. And I was like, don't worry, I won't burst their balloon or offend their ego, because they think that they're the best. But I mean, like, Galway loves casual dining, and I've always known that. I mean, some cities are built for fine dining, and maybe that's London or Hong Kong, or like, you need not only a lot of capital, but you also need financial sectors, and you need so much more things in a city if you want to have a number of fine dining restaurants. And like, there are 2 restaurants with Michelin stars in Galway, and I would say that's almost a breaking point. I mean, if you got a 3rd restaurant with a Michelin star in Galway, I don't know if we would all survive, because Galway is I suppose a very artistic bohemian city, and it loves casual dining. And Tartare and Cava, I suppose, are I suppose testament to that, and also the many other wonderful casual dining restaurants that we have in the city.
When it comes to your cooking style and technique as a chef, who has most influenced you?
Like, I'm self-taught as a chef, so I mean, I certainly have get a lot of my ideas from reading, and like more recently from looking at stuff online and on Instagram. I mean, there's a lot of different chefs who have influenced the way in which I cook, and certainly on the Nordic side, like chefs like René Redzepi or Magnus Nielsen have very much informed what we do in Aniar. I mean, on the other side of that, there's a lot of Spanish books. Claudio Roan's book on Spain has very much been very influential for me in terms of Spanish cooking. And then closer to home, I mean, Darina Allen's book, Myrtle Allen, Theodore Fitzgibbon, a lot of Irish chefs that have written about Irish food, like, inform me as well. So it's very mixed. And still, I mean, even some British cooks like Nigel Slater. I mean, I used to collect Nigel's columns he's still writing in the Observer, and the Guardian. And I used to love that, the way in which he, I suppose, tells a story through ingredients, and even through the time of year and that. And I suppose I really felt that was influential to the way in which I think about ingredients.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think your perfect meal would be if you could narrow it down to one thing?
Yeah, I get asked this question a bit sometimes, and then sometimes it disappoints people in the sense of think it's going to be the most sophisticated thing in the world. But like, my one of my epiphanies through my career as a cook, or through the process of becoming a chef, was when I was 11 or 12, and it was the first time we were on holidays in Tipperary, which is kind of in the southern Midlands in Ireland. And we were in this restaurant, and I said to my mother, I'm going to have the spaghetti bolognese. And this was in the 80s in Ireland, and she was like, you're not going to like that. You're not going to eat it, because everyone else was having burgers and chips. And for some reason, I wanted to be different. I was like, I'm having the spaghetti bolognese. And I remember it came out, and I remember eating it, and I remember realizing, I mean, I don't know if I realized at the time or I realized later, that food could not only could food make you different, but that food was different where you were, I suppose, wherever people were. And I grew up in I suppose, in a culture where, I mean, my grandmother never had pasta. Both my grandmothers in their house, and the explosion of Italian food in the 90s, in the late 80s and early 90s in Ireland, was deeply affected Irish food. And the first place I ever worked in was an Italian restaurant when I was 15, and falling in love with bread and pizzas and all of that sort of stuff. So I've always said that my last meal will be spaghetti bolognese, just very nicely cooked. And it's still something I cook a lot at home. My daughter loves it as well. I mean, when I'm in the restaurant, I cook differently. I love fish and I love shellfish. I love oysters. I love turbot cooked on the bone. I like whole. I suppose there is a kind of rustic side of me as well, where a big leg of lamb. I mean, I think you would find a lot of chefs that work in fine dining, when you ask them what they like, what they enjoy eating, it's usually the opposite of what they're cooking, because there's a refinement and you get your tweezers out and you put it all on the plate, and then you go home and you just want to dive into a big roast chicken. And that's your sweet spot. And I think it's important that people realize that people always think that I play food at home the way I play food in the restaurant. And I was like, oh my God, no, absolutely don't. Sometimes I go home and have a bowl of cereal. It's like, it's like, it's the opposite. They go, you hardly eat a bag of chips. And I was like, absolutely. I'm a normal person, or have a Chinese or an Indian, or like all of these things. And like, but certainly, in terms of the food that gives me most comfort, it's still, unfortunately, Italian food. As much as I cooked Spanish food over the years for a long time, I still love the warmth and the nostalgia you get from eating Italian food.
Now, as a English major, who is some of your favorite authors?
Well, hands down, would have to be Samuel Beckett. I think I have about 500 books on him in the house, and there would be the close number 2 would be James Joyce. I know now that sounds very stereotypical, but I fell in love with Beckett and Joyce's work pre-college, and it's I suppose I've always loved it. I mean, there's many different writers I love around the world. I mean, in terms of the States, Cormac McCarthy's work I really enjoy as well, and different German writers. But in terms of the Irish writers and some of the literature that we use in the restaurants, I mean, the poems of Seamus Heaney as well. And there's so much food mentioned. When I began the book and began looking for food in literature, you end up finding so much of it, and you didn't even realize. I don't know how many times I read Ulysses or any of Joyce's work and didn't even think about the food, and then you read it again thinking about food, and like, it's nearly on every single page, and it's testament. I mean, I mentioned it in the Irish Cookbook that these authors were interested in food because they're historical documents now as well, and so we can look at Ulysses, which is based in 1904, published in 1922, but we can say, okay, wow, we can look at, even though we mightn't have specific recipes, we can say, oh God, the guys were eating this in 1904, and that can help us broaden out our food culture. So literature helps us so much. And as I said to you, with the first recipe book, the 1688, which is in Burr Castle, if we look at medieval literature, we find references to food. And I found a reference, just one reference to, or one example was to this onion and dillis compote thing. That was mentioned in some middle medieval text in Ireland. And I don't know if it was a jam or if it was a stew, but we ended up making an onion and a seaweed compote. And that's just, I suppose, for me, the ways in which literature can influence food in a creative way.
JP, it's been wonderful talking to you. I really want to thank you for being on the podcast. I love talking to you, and I'd love to be able to talk to you again. Thank you.
Listen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
That was JP McMahon, author of the Irish Cookbook. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really had a great time talking to JP. I would talk to him again in a heartbeat several times. Such an interesting person, and his work is just truly magnificent, as I've said. Very humble, but he could definitely brag more, because his work, both in his cookbook, his menus for his restaurants, just phenomenal. And also his articles are just brilliant, as well as his podcast. So a man of many hats. Very interesting person. Love talking to him. Now on Friday, we're going to have another really wonderful person, Cenk Somnasoy, who is the author of the Artful Baker Cookbook, and he has his wonderful cookbook that has full of great, just amazing recipes and stories, and just phenomenal food photography. And we also talk about the Golden Girls a bit. So you're going to want to be here on Friday for Cenk Somnasoy, a Turkish author and baker who's written just a spectacular, one-of-a-kind cookbook, The Artful Baker. You gotta be here to hear that conversation. It was just fantastic. And then next Monday, we're going to have Emily Winston from Wojciech Bagel. So be here for that as well. So on that note, I will let you all go. Have a wonderful evening and happy cooking. If you like my podcast and want to contribute, we have a link on the website information where we have the bios for our guests, and you can contribute to Buy Me a Coffee, which is a website that you can basically give tips to the host of podcasts and other platforms if you like. So if you want to leave me a tip to purchase a coffee, I appreciate your gratitude. If you enjoy my podcast, please let other people know about it, share the information on social media, or tell a friend about it. Thank you very much.